Tonight's shiur is called The Power of Silence. Rachel, a tale of silence and tears. So I want to tell you a little bit, just briefly, a little bit of background, what you all know, but just to refresh our memory. Rachel was the daughter of Lavan together with Leah. Leah was the older daughter. Rachel was the younger daughter. And and it was tradition had it in those days that Yaakov, they were cousins, and Yitzhak has two sons, Esav the older one, Yaakov the younger one, and Esav will marry the older daughter Leah, and Yaakov will marry the younger daughter Rachel. That was the spoken words amongst the shadchanim, amongst the matchmakers, matchmaker.com, and all of that. That was out there. Leah was very upset with that, very disappointed with that, because everybody knew that Esav, although had great potential, he was not behaving the way a child of Yitzhak and a grandson of Abraham ought to behave. He was quite wild, and he was very, very wicked. So she was crying. The Torah says that her eyes were weak. Her eyes were weakened because of her tears. Her eyes lost her beauty because of her immense tears. Because of her immense tears, God heard her prayers, and she merited, in fact, to marry Yaakov. How was the story of Yaakov? What happened with the story of Yaakov? So we know that Esav sold the birthright to Yaakov, and Yaakov, by right, took the blessings from Esav in a disguise from Yitzhak. Much debate has been spoken about why did God make the whole blessings that were so crucial and that were deserving of Yaakov in the first place. Why did they go in a way of a disguise and a subterfuge? We discussed that on previous occasions, discussed it last year. It's not the topic of our conversation, but very interesting. Very interesting one. But the fact is that after the blessings, Yitzhak realized that the blessing belonged to Yaakov, and he conferred and he re-established or reconfirmed the blessings to Yaakov, again saying that the blessings of Abraham be given to you and your seed. After that, Rivka understood that Yaakov has wicked designs in his heart, and he's just waiting for his father to die, and he will kill Yaakov. She suggested to her husband Yitzhak to send away Yaakov to marry from my family. Marry my niece. Marry from my family. Go and send them to the house of Lavan. They should marry because Abraham was very particular that his seed be associated from his family and from the family that was imbued with the attribute of kindness. It was very important. He didn't want even from the best, from the king's children, daughters or grandchildren from the land of Canaan, because they had wickedness and bitterness and lack of compassion in their hearts. He wanted people who have compassion and people who have kindness in their heart. This is who he wanted for daughters, for their children. So indeed Yaakov went, and of course Yaakov immediately fell in love with Rachel, because Kabbalistically speaking, and I saw this written in a book, they were on the same wavelength Kabbalistically. They were both on the level of mercy. Leah, in fact, had a Kabbalistic wavelength in relationship with Esav. And Rachel had a Kabbalistic wavelength, they were the same plane, they were on the same spiritual attribute as that of Yaakov. Rachel and Leah, Rachel and Yaakov, similar spiritual attributes. And of course, so he fell in love with her both spiritually and as well as emotionally, etc. Yaakov very much wanted to marry her, and there was a deal struck. You work for her for 7 years, and then you will have a hand in marriage. I don't know too many people who would agree to such a deal today, but Yaakov was happy to agree to such a deal. So he agreed to such a deal. The night of the wedding, he switched the older one with the younger one. Yaakov knew that Lavan was a trickster. So what did he do? He gave Rachel simanim, he gave her signs. He gave her signs by which he will know that, because people were very modest in those days, he gave her signs by which he will know that it is her and not Leah. And of course, being sisters, very possible that they looked very similar as well. So he gave her signs, and by which, when they will consummate the marriage, he will know that it is her and not Leah, because he realized who he's dealing with. A swindler. Lavan was called Lavan because he whitewashed everything. Everything that he did, all of the shenanigans, all of the crooked deals, everything was always whitewashed. Lavan. He made everything seem pure, everything was clean, everything was on the books, but it wasn't. Everything always had an excuse, everything had a reason, everything was always right, he was always right. That's why one of the reasons why it was called Lavan. Everything is white, everything is good, I'm always right. Rachel did something extraordinary. Something absolutely extraordinary. She gave away the signs in order not to embarrass her sister. She gave away the signs to her older sister. And she says, listen, what happened was that the father switched her, and she knew that her sister is going to be in big trouble. Her sister now is going to be extremely embarrassed and very shamefaced, and will be rejected from the house of Yaakov. So she gave her the signs. Now you have to understand what that means. We will soon elaborate that on a little bit more, what that means to her. And of course, he ended up consummating the marriage with Leah, and she stayed his wife. The next day he complained and he says, what have you done? He says, Lavan of course came with an excuse. Even though he worked for her 7 years, he came, what do you expect me to do? We don't do this in our society. We don't marry the younger, the older. You don't marry the younger or the older, even though you agreed to the deal. And even though I worked 7 years, 365 days times 7 every single day. That's done. That's all right, because you profited from it. But God forbid that we are accustomed to steal and to rip off. That's all right. But the practice and the custom, God forbid that I, an upright man in my community, God forbid that I should break that custom. So he says, listen, work for her another 7 years. She's all yours. And he did. I don't know too many people who would do that the second time round, let alone the first time round. Nonetheless, that's what he did. I want to tell you, before we get into the thicket and the details of what she did in her sacrifice, and what indeed was her sacrifice, I want to be able to tell you what our sages say about Rachel. Sages say about Rachel that you should know clearly that in the merit of Rachel, the future redemption, i.e., the redemption that we are awaiting currently now, will come in her merit. That's a very interesting statement. I want to read to you a midrash in the in Echa Rabbah. Echa is the Megillat. Echa is the scroll of Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av, mourning the destruction of both first and second temple, and we read about the different tragedies, and we speak about the loneliness of Jerusalem. And the Jewish people and their lowly state, etc. There is a very interesting midrash that speaks about the future redemption. And I want to read it out to you because the words are very beautiful. It is a famous midrash, but nonetheless I want to be able to read it out to you. B'shah shehara bet hamikdash, at the time when the temple was destroyed, ba Avraham lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the soul of Abraham Avinu came before God. Crying and pulling his hairs and pulling his beard. And he's mourning and he's screaming out, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, ל-100 שנה נתת לי בן. I waited so long. I showed faith in you. I did everything right for you. I waited and waited, and only when I was 100 years old, I merited to have a son. וכשעמד על דעתו, when the son finally grew older and was independent, והיה בחור בן 37 שנים, and became of age of 37 years old, אמרת לי עלה עולה לפניי. You commanded me to go and bring him up as a elevated offering, as a sacrifice. In other words, sacrifice him before me. ונעשיתי עליו כאכזרי ולא ריחמתי עליו. And I became hard-hearted. How do you say akhzari again? Cruel. My nature is to be kind, and I became cruel. Which father would do such a thing? I forced myself to be cruel, so to speak, because you commanded this, to sacrifice my own son. And I didn't have mercy upon him. The strangers I have mercy. I sit outside in the hot desert sun, I wait for people to give kindness to them, to give them bread, to give them water. For my own son, you forced me to be cruel and not to show the attributes of mercy that you so much love and want. אלא אני בעצמי כפתתי אותו ולא תזכור לי זאת ולא תרחם. I myself bound him. I myself prepared to go and give him to you. And you will not remember this merit for me, and will not have mercy upon my children's children who are now going in exile. God didn't answer. God was still. Yitzhak presented himself before the Almighty God. Patah Yitzhak v'amar. Yitzhak opened his mouth and he said, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, כשאמר לי אבא, אלוקים יראה לו, haseh le'olah beni. When I asked my father Abraham, where are we going? What are we doing? He said, we're going to bring a sacrifice to God. And I asked him, where is the sacrifice? And Abraham told me, God will show us the sacrifice. He will choose for himself which sacrifice. And I knew exactly who's going to be the sacrifice, who's going to be the scapegoat. Yet I was silenced. לא עיכבתי על דבריך, ונעקדתי ברצון ליבי על גבי המזבח. I did not withhold your will, and I allowed myself to be bound upon the altar. ופשטתי צווארי תחת הסכין, and I stretched out my neck under the knife. 37 years old. Teenagers today tell the parents what to do. Teenagers tell them where to go. 37-year-old is going to just sit there and say, come on, would you like me to help you sharpen the knife? You can well imagine what our kids would say. You're not going to remember this for me? You're not going to have mercy upon my children as they go into exile now? God didn't answer. Patah Yaakov Amar. Yaakov Avinu opened his mouth and he said, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, Lo 20 shana amaditi bebet Lavan. Did I not withstand 20 years in the house of Lavan, the treacherous liar and thief, and I did not become corrupted by him. And I was there to do your bidding, to do your will, to build the family of Israel, to bring to the world 12 tribes of Israel. And when I came out of the house of Lavan, traveling back to Israel, well, who was my greeting party? Who came to greet me? None other than the wicked Esav. Ubikesh la'arog et banai, and he wanted to kill my children. Masarti atzmi lemita alehem. I was willing to sacrifice my life over them. V'achshav nimsuru biyad oivehem ketzon letivha. Now my children are given over to our enemy as sheep to the slaughter. Ve'ata lo tizkor li zot. And will you not remember my merit? Will you not remember my sacrifice? Lerachem al banai, to have mercy upon my children. God did not answer. Patah Moshe ve'amar. Moshe Rabbeinu opened his mouth. Ribono shel olam, Master of the world. Lo ro'ene man ha'iti al Yisrael 40 shana. Why was I not a loyal shepherd for the Jewish people, your nation, for 40 years? V'ratzti lifnehem kesus bamidbar, and I ran before them like a horse in the desert. כשיגיע הזמן שיכנסו לארץ, and when time came for me to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor, to enter the land of Israel with them, to go el hamenucha vel hanahala, to go into peace, to go into harmony, to go into our inheritance. Gazarta alai bamidbar yiflu atzemotai, you decreed, your bones will fall in the desert. ועכשיו שגלו, שלחת לי לספוד ולבכות עליהם. Now that they are exiled, will I then only be permitted to mourn and to cry over them? Will you not then have mercy? Will you not remember my sacrifice, my loyalty to your people? God did not answer. באותו שעה, that very moment, קפצה רחל אימנו לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא. Rachel, a matriarch, jumped before the Almighty God, so to speak. Ve'amran, she said, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, galui lefanecha, it is known before you, sheYaakov avdecha havani ahava yetera, that Yaakov, your servant, loved me exceedingly. Ve'avad bishvili la'aba sheva shanim, and he worked for me 7 years for my father. כשהשלימו אותן 7 שנים והגיע הזמן נושא לבעלי, when those 7 days were completed and the time of my marriage came upon, יעץ אבי להחליפני לבעלי בשביל אחותי, my father advised my sister to marry יעקב. והודעתי לבעלי ומסרתי לו סימן שיכיר ביני ובין אחותי, and I gave him a sign by which he will recognize me and he will know me from my sister, כדי שלא יוכל אבי להחליפני, in order that my father will not be able to swap me, to exchange me, because she also knew who she's dealing with. ולערב חלפו אחותי לבעלי בשבילי, and they exchanged my wife to my husband instead of me. ומסרתי לאחותי כל הסימנים שמסרתי לבעלי, and I gave over all of the signs to my sister, in order that my husband will, so to speak, recognize me, כדי שיהיה סבור שהיא רחל, in order that he will think that she is indeed me, she is רחל, ולא עוד, אלא שנכנסתי תחת המיטה, והיה מדבר עמי והיא שותקת. And furthermore, when he came to consummate the marriage, I hid underneath the bed, and when he spoke to me, I answered instead of Rachel. So he will recognize my voice and not her voice. ואני משיבתו על כל דבר ודבר, and I'm responding כדי שלא יכיר לכל אחותי, in order that he will recognize me and not hear the voice of someone else, i.e. my sister. וגמלתי חסד עמה, and I did this kindness with her. ולא קינאתי בה, ולא הוצאתיה לחרפה, I was not jealous of her, and I did not take her out for shame and for embarrassment. ומה אני, שאני בשר ודם, עפר ואפר, and me that I am simple, of flesh and blood, of dust and of earth. לא קינאתי לצרה שלי, I was not jealous of my competitor, my sister. ולא הוצאתיה לבושה ולחרפה, and I did not cause her to go out of shame and of embarrassment. ואתה מלך חי וקיים רחמן, you, O living King, who endure forever and are merciful. מפני מה קינאת לעבודת כוכבים שאין בה ממש? You are jealous of idol worship that is of sticks and stones and have no value, have no true existence. Ve'amar, God answered her. He didn't answer Abraham. He didn't respond to Yitzhak or Yaakov or Moshe. He answered her, Bishvelech Rachel, because of you, Rachel. Ani mahzir et Yisrael emkoman, I return the Jewish people, I will return the Jewish people to their place. In other words, I will redeem the people in your merit, because of what you did. Hada hu diktiv, this is what it means, and this is what it refers to in the verse that it says, Ko amar Hashem, this is what God said. Kol beraman ishma, there's a voice heard up high. Nihi bichi tamrurim, there's crying and there's mourning. Rachel mebaka al baneha, there's a cry in heaven. And who is crying, says God, through the prophet Jeremiah. This is Rachel, she's crying. Rachel mebakal baneha, Rachel is crying over her children. Menala and Lahem al baneha, she refuses to be comforted. She refuses to find any solace for her children. Ki enena. Uchtiv ko amar Hashem, and as it's written, so says God, Minei kolech mi bechi, ve'enaich mi dim'a. Hold back your voice from crying and your eyes from tears. This is very important. Be silent, God tells her. Hold back your voice. Why did he tell her that? Hold back your tears. Why did he tell her that? For there is reward for your actions, for your deeds. And your reward, what you did, your sacrifice, will stand your children in good stead. I will bring them back. And as it's written, there is hope for the end. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Ne'um Hashem, promises God. Veshavu banim ligvulech, and the children will come back to their boundaries, to the land of Israel, and will be redeemed. Beautiful, powerful midrash, very inspiring, very touching. Many times when I read it, I want to cry. But the sacrifice of Rahel was real, was very powerful. But why was it more powerful than that of Abraham Avinu? Abraham Avinu was a spiritual giant. His sacrifice was immense. Why was her merit greater than that of Yitzhak or Yaakov, or even that of Moshe Rabbeinu? You know what it means to lead the Jewish people for 40 years, 365 days? Moshe, the water, can we have a bit of cordial with it? Can we have some Pepsi? No, diet Pepsi. Here's Pepsi. No, diet Pepsi. Bread, I'm giving you bread from heaven. What about the avatihim? What about a bit of watermelon, the kishuim, the cucumbers, the garlic? What about that? We missed the fish. 40 years of that can drive anybody insane. The sacrifice of Moshe Rabbeinu was no small thing, no small matter at all. Yet God chose not to ignore, so to speak, or God forbid, their sacrifice, for their sacrifice indeed was great. He chose from everyone to use the merit, not that their merit was small, it was great indeed. As the Gemara speaks greatness about our patriarchs, they are our founders, our pioneers. The Gemara speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu was never left. His merit has never left his flock. But he chose that the final redemption comes about through the merit of Rahel. Why? And what's this business of holding back your tears and be silent? Why specifically silence and tears? Hence the topic, Rahel, a tale of silence and tears. We have to understand that what was the reason why we're in exile now. The first temple was destroyed. Subsequent to that, 410 years later, after the building of the second temple, it was destroyed. And it was destroyed because of our sins. What was the reason that the temples were destroyed? So let's look at the Gemara in Masechet Yuma, page 9. The Gemara says as follows. Mikdash Rishon mipnei harav. The first temple, why was it destroyed? Mipnei shlosha devarim, because of three sins. Shehayu bo avodah zarah, vegilui arayot, v'shfichut damim. There were three sins that unfortunately the Jewish people got carried away with. They became influenced by the society around them, i.e., they began the cult practices of idol worship. It was very alluring. The reason why, the Gemara says, the reason why the Jewish people were attracted to idol worship was not because idol worship was an item, was a thing for them. Because idol worship in those days was associated with sexual license, like the hippie days. You know, a lot of people anti-establishment and got into the hippie, and because it just meant free everything. Everything was free. The Gemara says the Jewish people weren't attracted to idol worship at all. What's idol worship to a Jewish nation? But the sexual license and freedom, that attracted them, and the whole culture of the idol worship, that attracted them, unfortunately. That's what caught them. That's what caught them with the Midianites, and that's what caught them, unfortunately, in Israel. And thus, you begin this and you begin that and you begin a relationship, and then you go to the theaters, and then you play lawn bowls, and you go to the cricket, and you go to the football, and all right, so we go to church on Sunday. So we go to church on Sunday. What's the big deal? I get free wine. What's the big deal? That's how it started. And then one thing leads to another. And then when you move away from God, you move away from self-respect for yourself and self-respect for others. And then they began to totally disrespect others. And then began Gilui Arayot. People didn't respect boundaries. And again, the sexual license, allowing them freedoms that ought not to be. There has to be boundaries. No adultery, these type of things. And then, of course, where there's jealousy, where there's greed, where there's sexual license, there's, of course, fichut damim, there's, of course, murder. Aval mikdash sheni, but the second temple, why was it destroyed? Shehayu oskim b'torah u'mitzvot u'gemelut hasadim. That generation was a generation of scholars. People studied, people did mitzvot, people did act of kindness. The Gemara asks, mipnei ma harav? Because what sin? What did they do already that the temple was destroyed? People had baseless hatred for one another. For no reason. People couldn't see the good in others. They did charity. Yeah, someone's sick. Here, here's money. There's a foundation for there. Here it is. You're building a hospital. Tfaddal, there you go. It's all there. But true respect, true love for one another, this they didn't have. This teaches us, says the Gemara, that where there is baseless hatred, this can be compared to the three sins of idol worship, of murder, and of immorality. Because if the first temple was destroyed, not because of other sins, but because of these three, the second temple was destroyed because of lack of brotherhood, or because of lack of respect and senseless hatred, then that means that sin equates to the other three. It's very severe. This then, ladies and gentlemen, is why the third temple, the redemption of after the sin of baseless hatred, will be specifically in the merit of Rachel Imenu. Because God wants to teach us a lesson. And the lesson is, if you want to be able to reverse the condition of exile, you must remove its cause. And the cause is baseless hatred. And how do you remove baseless hatred? By acting acts of baseless love. Love that is beyond the self. You don't love someone because there's a reason, there's a cause, because they're good to me, or because I want to get in their good books, or because they're smart, or because they give me respect, or makes me feel good. I'm giving charity because it makes me feel good. Baseless love means to say a love that transcends self, beyond any logical explanation. There is no greater example of that love than that of Rachel Imenu. Can you imagine that there is a woman here who is in love and wants to get married and knows and understands who she's marrying, a Yaakov Avinu, one of the righteous people of the world. And she knows that he will be the progenitor of the Jewish nation. And he will be the dreams, the realization of the dream of Rav Abraham and of Yitzhak. And she wants to be a part of that. And she gives that all up. How does she give it up? So listen to this. Midrash Tanhuma, Parashat Vayetze. This parasha. The Midrash says as follows: En lecha na'a min Rachel. There is no more beautiful person in the world than Rachel. When we say that Yaakov fell in love with Rachel, he fell in love with her attributes. Someone asked me, how do you know that this person is the right one? Without going to all of the details, of course there has to be a certain level of physical attraction. But beyond the physical attraction, it is the beauty that you allow yourself to see in that person that shines forth. That is the true beauty of a person. That's what makes the person really, truly attractive and beautiful. The inequality. I mean, there's many beautiful people in the world. When you come to know them, you come to hate them. How many people get married to the most beautiful people in the world, male or females, and they hate each other, and they fight with each other, and they cursing each other out? You think to yourself, these people fell in love at one stage in their lives? Is it possible that people who married each other, who made vows and commitments to each other, one time loved each other? Look at how they're cursing each other out. They're wealthy, and they're this, and they have all. What's going on? You see sometimes beautiful people externally, but you see a harshness to their face. You see a coldness to their face. You see a cruelty. And then when you look a little bit deeper beyond the skin deep beauty, you see something that is quite ugly indeed. And then sometimes you can see someone who's not necessarily the most beautiful person in the world, but their smile, but their twinkle in their eye, but their goodness just shines forth. That is the most beautiful person in the world. And despite the fact that perhaps the external beauty somewhat diminished, you love that person more and more as time goes on, because you get to know their inner beauty and their inner greatness, and you appreciate. Getting a bit emotional because that's how I feel about my wife. So this is what happened with Rachel, the relationship between Rachel and Leah. I beg your pardon, Yaakov and Rachel. There was first of all, a spiritual attraction. It says in a holy book, the son of Baal HaSulam, he wrote a pirush on the Zohar, and he writes over there that the attraction was because they were on the same spiritual wavelength. Both of them were of the attribute of hesed, of kindness. He was of mercy, she was of kindness. They automatically hit it off spiritually, emotionally. Her inner beauty or qualities, we see anybody is able to do what she did is the most beautiful person in the world. That's what the Midrash says. Look and see, there's no more beautiful person than Rachel. How so? Listen to this. When we speak about sacrifice, listen to this. Yaakov, for 7 years, he would send gifts to Rachel. 1 week a bouquet of beautiful flowers. 1 week some beautiful chocolates. 1 week Hazer Baba. 1 week baklava that he got. 1 week kakes and babas. Every week a different thing he would send. Oh, Lavan, thank you very much. How thoughtful, how beautiful of you. He would take it and give it to Leah. For 7 years. For 7 years, Rachel did not open her mouth. You know what that means? I remember my mom would tell me that when they were young, so the sisters would steal clothes from each other when they were going out on a date or whatever to meet their potential. So without telling the other one, they would take a cardigan, and then they'd find out. They'd say, oh, you took my best cardigan. You took 7 years. Oh, beautiful bunch of roses, and he's coming in, and it's got a beautiful card there to my wonderful Rachel, and Lavan just throws it off, throws it in the fireplace, and gives it to Leah, and he says, here, this is from Yaakov. 7 years. And she shuts her mouth. This is the power of silence. She was silent for 7 years. That's why God tells in the merit of your silence, I silence you now from your mourning and your crying. I silence you now from your misped, from your crying, from your mourning over your children. Because you were silent for 7 years. You said nothing. When those presents were going to you and it was given to your sister, you said nothing, not one protest. That silence is so powerful that it speaks louder than any words, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to what it says. V'ayta Rachel shoteket, and Rachel was quiet. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Kol yamai gadalti ben hachamim. All my days I grew up amongst the wise. Velo matzati leguf tov ela shetika. I have found nothing more beneficial to the body, to man, than silence. Can you imagine? He goes amongst the scholars. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the giant, the leader of the Jewish people. And he says, you know what I learned from the wise when I was learning? I learned the power of silence. What does that mean? Do you think that he only learned silence from them? He learned the power of speech. He learned how powerful speech is. He learned that when God created man and he made him into a talking human being, he was taught the power of communication. The Hachamim did not stop teaching. They kept on teaching and teaching and saying another shiur and another dvar Torah and another sermon and another sermon, to keep on teaching and teaching and teaching and teaching, that something will penetrate, something will be aroused, something will be learned and taught. Yet they also knew how to be quiet. The Hachamim knew how to speak. You don't learn silence from someone who's naturally silent. You don't learn the power of silence from someone who's mute. You don't learn silence, the power of silence, from someone who's afraid to say a speech. You learn the power of silence from someone who knows how to talk, who knows how to give a shiur, who knows how to give a sermon, and yet there are times that they remain silent. Such a person, his silence is more powerful than words. Because he knows the power of speech. Yet there are times that he chooses not to use the power of speech, a God-given gift. That's powerful. Listen to this. Rachel tafsa b'shtika. Rachel, she knew when to be quiet. She also knew when to talk. When did she know when to talk? When she went and told her sister the simanim, the signs. She could have said nothing. She could have been quiet. I'm a shy girl. I don't talk much. No. She wasn't shy then. She got up. She overcame her own desire, her own dreams and aspirations to build the family of the Jewish nation. And she went to Leah and she told her what the signs are. Furthermore, she hid under the bed, the matrimonial bed. And when Yaakov spoke, so to speak, to in his mind to Rachel, but it was really to Leah, she knew how to speak. She could have been quiet and shamed the sister. She knew how to speak then. Only from a person who knows how to use his speech properly, at the right time, and knows how to use it for mitzvot and for Torah. When they are silent, their silence is meaningful. Their silence must be understood and appreciated. Such a person, when they cry out to God, God listens. Because they know when to talk, they know when to use their speech, and they know when to be silent. There was no one who showed self-sacrifice and love that transcended self like Rachel, because she was destined for Yaakov Avinu. She was destined to marry Yaakov Avinu. God tells her, don't cry, stop crying. Why is that significant? Because the sages tell us that Rachel cried a lot, just like Leah cried. Leah cried because she didn't want to marry who? Esav. She didn't want to fall in the lot of Esav and live her life with Esav. Rachel was willing to give up this world and the world to come because she figured, Esav sold the birthright. So by right, who is the firstborn now? Yaakov. If Yaakov then by right, because he got the blessings, and Yitzhak conferred and confirmed the blessings. So by right, he is now the firstborn. Well, the firstborn should go then to who? To Leah. Maybe now God changed things and now I'm now destined to the younger. Now by technicality, Esav now is the younger, at least in spiritual level. Maybe I should go to him. And she cried. It wasn't just that she gave up Yaakov. It wasn't just that she gave up this world. It was that she gave up the world to come as well. Because to live with a righteous person, who can survive that? Who can survive that? And in those days, it wasn't like Lavan's going to ask her. Do you agree? You don't agree? She was very worried. She cried. She didn't have to cry because she didn't have to give the signs to Leah in the first place. She didn't have to hide under the bed and speak when she could have been silent. And be silent when she doesn't need to speak. She spoke when she could have been silent, and she was silent when she could have spoken. That is very powerful in the eyes of God. Human nature is a very important lesson for us that we learn from here. You want to reverse the exile, you got to reverse the conditions. And you got to learn that from Rahel Imenu. He learns how to be silent when nature tells us to call out. And you got to talk when nature tells you to be quiet. It suits you to be quiet. Our nature is, what do we hear in conversations? I gave it to him. I gave it to him, and his mother's mother, I gave it to him. I told him off like he's never been told off before. And we pride ourselves. And we feel so good about it. Human nature. Someone wrongs us. Someone threatens us. Someone does something that doesn't suit us. What do? We go, we say, we talk, we tell them, we're happy about it. We pride ourselves. I told him, I said, I'll flatten you. That's human nature. So at times we got to learn when to overcome human nature, and even when it doesn't suit us, to be silent. And that silence is very powerful, as we will soon see. And then there are times that we got to talk and not sit back and say, well, it's not my business, doesn't interest me, doesn't suit me. I'll sit back, I'll be quiet, let others talk. It's not my inyan, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. Like my son sometimes tells me, Abba, just I tell him, you have to stand up for what you believe in, otherwise you're not worth anything. You're not worth your words if you don't stand up for what you believe in. Your silence is worthless if you don't speak when you have to speak. And your words are worthless when you do speak, when you should be silent. So listen to this. Rahel tafsa b'shtika amdu zarea b'shtika. She was silent. She merited to have children who were silent at the right time. She merited to have children who brought about blessings and miracles to the Jewish people through their silence, through their tears, but also through their silence. She saw her presents being given away 7 years to her sister. She was quiet. Benjamin bena ha'even shelo min ha'efod yashfe. Her son Benjamin, her natural son Benjamin, the 12 stones represents the 12 tribes of Israel. Do you know the name of the stone of Benjamin? Yashpe. The Gemara says Yashpe is not called, what is it in English? Jasper? Jasper? Is that what it is? Jasper? Jasper. Yada be'mechirat Yosef v'shatak. He knew about the sale of Yosef, but he understood it's a heavenly thing. He knew how to keep his mouth shut. Benjamin, his brother, was sold. He could have cried and said, no, what have they done? They cheated, they're lying to you. They went and they sold their own flesh and blood to Egypt, go and save him. But he understood it was a heavenly decree. He shut his mouth. And this is what the Gemara says. וזהו ישפה, יש לו פה ושותק. גם שאול, גם אסתר. Miracles happen. The yashpeh, what's yashpeh? Yeshpeh. Even the stone, the name of the stone tells us the quality of the people. Benjamin's stone was yeshpeh. There is mouth. What does it mean there is mouth? You only respect silence from someone who knows how to talk. And you only respect someone who knows how to talk when he knows how to be silent. What do we know? The miracle happened with Esther. ואין אסתר מגדת מולדתה ותאמה כאשר ציווה עליה מרדכי. Mordechai told her, listen, don't publicize your nation yet. The king hounded her. Tell me, where do you come from? Who's your nation? Kept it a secret. She knew when to be quiet. But when the time came and she said, this is Haman, the wicked one, she stood up. She risked her life. Mordechai tells her, go before the king. She says, how can I go before the king? I haven't been called for 30 days. And we know the rule. Anybody who presents himself in front of the king, that is not called he's put to death. I'm risking, go. Logic tells you not to go. Logic tells you don't open your mouth, be still. Logic told her and she didn't. Logic tells you the king asks and demands, what's your nation, where you come from? Logic doesn't tell him. He promised her all the gifts in the world. Just let me know where you're from. I'm intrigued, mystery. She didn't. Logic says to say, she was silent. She knew when to talk, she knew when to be silent. The Hachamim know when to talk, know when to be silent. It's a big trick. God respects more those who they use their speech properly when they should use their speech, and know how to be silent when they should be silent and not use their speech. And this is the power of silence, and this is the power of Rahel, that on the one hand she cried because she didn't want to fall in the hands of Esav. God says, hold back your tears, you'll be rewarded. She spoke when she could have been silent, it would have been to her benefit. She revealed to Rahel the signs. She was under the bed and she spoke to Yaakov. She wasn't jealous. For 7 years, she didn't protest to the gifts being given away. She was silent. God tells her your silence and your tears, both will be rewarded because both were at the right time, at the appropriate place, the times when it didn't suit you. And you could have held back for your own benefit. This is what Shlomo HaMelech says when he says, Et lahshov, there's a time to think, to be silent. Ve'et ledaber, there's a time to speak. And that's why we find in regards to Yaakov, Yitzhak, when he gives him the blessing, he says, who's this? He says, the voices of Jacob, the hands, they feel like the hands of Esav. If you notice in the Torah, it says, Kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob. If you have a look, the first kol is spelled without a vav. It's deficient. It's spelled kuf lamed. The next one is spelled kuf vav lamed. The way you spell kol in Hebrew is kuf vav lamed. The first time it's spelled is deficient, showing that the voice of Jacob, the power of Jacob to subdue the hands of Esav, is when you know when to use your voice at the right time, be maleh, and you know when to be deficient, to hold back. Already Yitzhak prophetically is telling Yaakov the power of silence and the power of speech. And the power of silence comes from those who have and utilize the power of speech at the right time. And this is what it says in the Gemara. And this is what it says in the Rambam in Echod Deot. He quotes this and lauds very much silence in the right place. The Gemara says a very interesting thing in Yuman, page 23. The Gemara says, those that are denigrated, that are shamed, but don't shame back, don't denigrate back. What does human nature say? Oh, he told me, I'll tell him off. He shamed me, I'll shame him double. The Gemara says, those that are quiet, those that are shamed but don't shame back, shomrin herpatan ve'enan meshivim, they hold back their embarrassment and don't answer back. Alehem hakatuv omer, about them does the verse say, Ve'ohavav ketzet hashemesh begvurato, Ve'ohavav, those that God loves, are like the sun in its most power, in its power and its glory. In other words, they are as powerful as the sun. You know how powerful the sun is? How much light it gives, how much energy, how much life. Someone who shuts his mouth when he can speak, when he feels like it, when he wants to lash out and quiet, is as bright as the sun. For such a person, God listens. For Rahel, God listens. For Rahel, who showed transcendental, I love that word, an absolute transcendence of love, that's how you reverse the conditions of exile. She is the classic example of true free love that defies logic, that defies any personal reason. She had all the reason in the world why not to give the signs, why to be silent when she spoke, and to speak when she was silent. Because of this, she merited that her children would come out of exile. And this is the reason why she's buried, by the way, where she's buried. She's not buried in Hebron, where the rest of the matriarchs and patriarchs are. And if you remember, before Yaakov passed away, he almost is apologizing to Yosef, and he tells, listen, don't hold a grudge against me. It's God's will that she buries there. You know why? Because come a time when the Jewish people will be marched out of Israel in shame into exile. They'll stop by her grave and they will pray. And she will raise a voice in heaven. And God will hear her voice. In her merit, God would hear her voice, because her voice is worthy of speaking, of listening. Her silence is more powerful than her voice. And God will tell her, be silent in the merit of when you were silent. Hold back your tears in the merit of the time that you had tears. Yes, there is reward for your actions. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. And your children will be returned back to the boundaries. So God had mercy on her. She merited to marry Yaakov. She was responsible for saving the Jewish people in the time of Esther, because Esther was her great-granddaughter. She comes from Benjamin. Benjamin was her son. The first king of Israel, Shaul, came from her. And the end redemption also will come from her. So we see what the power of silence is, because we also understand what the power of speech is. What's also very interesting is we call Rahel Imenu, Rahel a matriarch. You know, the 10 tribes of Israel were exiled from Israel, the northern tribes. There's only really 2 tribes that were left, that of Judah and that of Benjamin. The majority is that of Judah. Who is the mother of Judah, of Yehudah, of which the Jewish people are called Yehudim? Leah. Yet we call her our matriarch. How can we call her our matriarch if possibly the majority of us are not her biological children? She's our spiritual mother. If it wasn't for her, Rahel would not get married. She would marry Esav, and who knows who her children would be. She's our spiritual mother, and that is even greater. And that is why her merit, we stand in her merit, and the redemption will come in her merit. Have a good evening, everybody. And is there any questions? Anybody have any questions?